All right, we are back at it on the SuccessFlow podcast, and per usual, I'm excited, but more excited than even normal to introduce our guest, a guy that's really impacted both of our lives, and so excited for the conversation that we're about to have, welcoming Zanzibar Vermelio to the SuccessFlow podcast. Z, how are you doing today?
Good, my brothers. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too, Z. It's only been, just a couple of weeks since we last saw each other up in beautiful Heber, Arizona. Got a little bit of rain, enjoyed some cooler weather, and you're wicked good on the cornhole tournament as well. So it's fun to...
It's not.
Well, the listeners weren't there, Zanzibar. You could have just let that one ride, and no one would know.
The only round I won was the buy. What was the buy that they gave us in the
beginning? That's right. Well, we only gave the buys to the good ones, so you were one of the ones that got the buy. But all jokes aside, we're excited to have you on the podcast and just kind of, very, very short debrief of what was Summit, and then just kind of get into what you're up to and how you operate and think. And just for an introduction, you facilitated our second summit in a row. You ran the workshop and ran our mastermind summit. We meet for 48 hours immersed, working on our businesses and ourselves within our mastermind called Junto. Actually, Junto, I think, is what we agreed it was going to be called. Although Phil would disagree. So anyway, we're excited to have you on and kind of dive into that a little bit. So we'll just start there and then we'll get into the background if that's cool. What was your experience like from your perspective?
There's a couple of things. The thing that's immediately there when you ask what's your perspective is I continue to be amazed by the group of people that the Junto program is and their response to being challenged to think bigger and to think more universally about themselves as an entity in the world that makes a difference. I work with a lot of groups of people, as you guys know. I've spoken in close to 100, probably not quite 100 masterminds, and the Junto program continues to impress me. I find I want to live my life from a higher playing field, meaning a higher intent than simply making money, profit. There has to be along with it a universal intent to make a difference, whether that's in the marketplace, whether that's with the employees, whether it's with the culture, or on the side with the philanthropic intent on the side of business. The businesses that I work with, same kind of thing. I'm no longer nervous. For the first few times I addressed the Junto group, I was nervous about the things that I was challenging them for. I'm no longer nervous about anything that I could challenge. The Junto group is a pristine consciousness of people that mean to be driven by highest possible intent. I'm not sure it was that way when they started, but as this group has gone further and further on, it's become apparent that the only way they want to bend is in terms of what's the best possible outcome we can stand for together as a group for each other's lives, for the community at large, for our businesses, and then for even addressing the industry or geopolitical landscape. So that's the first thing that I'm left with, is just being completely impressed with the level of consciousness and what people are able to embrace. The things that we worked on in that weekend, I don't work on hardly ever. It's it's like I'll work with an executive team for 7 years and then maybe get into some of the things after rigorously working with them for 7 years on management, culture, value proposition, scalable designs, and then sales planning, and then revisit leadership and culture. And then how does that fit into higher conscious and leadership? And what can we challenge beyond that? And then 7 years later, we're working with some of the higher concepts that we were working with, like to design a culture of an organization from honor and the way that it was embraced. Some of the people in the Junto group, in my experience, you being two of them, Jeremy being able to lean in the way that he was, and a few other people, it was almost like if I was to have a heart attack and fall over, somebody could, 7 people in that room could have finished my sentence. And we were working on some of the hardest stuff that anybody would ever work on from a leadership perspective. I'm just really impressed with the quality of consciousness that Junto embraces. That's number one. The second thing, there's a lot of work to be done. So walking out of that conference, it opens the door for opportunity to things. It didn't close the door like, oh, we've completed a training on scalability and we're now leaders in a whole nother way that all that happened was to shine a light on what isn't. And that's all the conference was to shine a light on what isn't, which is both empowering and frustrating at the same time. So you've got business leaders who mean to create something powerful at the level of industry, who mean to create something that's powerful at the level of their employees, and then for themselves, their lives, and their families. There was a little bit of a wake-up call to how much they're not, in terms of how far can you press those concepts and what do they really look like in their ultimate design. What wants to happen next is to make sure that there's follow-up to making sure that those things happen. So I just want to say that, like, the first is being impressed with who Junto is. And second is, if there isn't proper follow-up on those things being, you can keep continuing to drive a wedge in those concepts that people can embrace something more and more and more. The conference does have the potential to just be an interesting weekend rather than a powerful line of demarcation that causes greatness. So there's that.
You nailed it. And two things that you said there about getting in front of the group and pressing them. I think that everyone that has gotten in front of that room has had that feeling like, how is this going to land? How far can we go? And right. Afterwards, it's extremely eye-opening. The second thing you said there, I couldn't agree more. So many people said, "Oh, are you relieved that that this has been lifted off? That we got through the summit?" And it was like, it's the opposite. Like, there is so much to do in such a great way now that we have this framework. So I couldn't agree more. Want to get to back to your origin. And this is a tough one because I learned so much more about you the past last week. And I do think it's interesting that as I've been talking about Summit and getting prepped for it, anytime I mention you, it is really profound that no one has any idea who you are. And the visceral response of, wait, his name's Zanzibar? And was thinking about the book, The Truth Hidden in Your Name, or there's a book about all these things about name, how you morph to it, it morphs to you. But can you just, in a nutshell, I know it's a long story, but one, tighten that up and talk about Zanzibar and taking a life of its own, but then a little bit of your origin story and how you got that early work ethic. The amount that you achieved by 22 is extremely important to bring us to current date. So just wrap all that up in the origin if you can.
The name was a joke. I don't know how much you want to spend on the podcast about that story. It takes about 12 minutes to tell that story properly, but it was a joke in grade school that stuck with my friends. And one of my friends is a computer genius and is widely regarded as the one of, if not the top systems architect in the entire world today. And he was a friend of mine in 6th, 7th, 8th grade and on through high school. Still a great friend of mine today. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago. His name's Sean Millichamp, by the way, outstanding human being. He had his dad had a cabling business and then computer company that failed. But this was back in the day when there were no, computers yet. Roughly 1 out of every 22 homes had a computer in it. And all it did was email, and you could only email 1 out of every 22 people. It wasn't useful. But for kids in high school, you could play DOS-based games on the system called Renegade, and he programmed a Renegade system to operate one of his computers. He had 3 computers in his room, and one of them ran a bulletin board system called Renegade. And I was his charismatic friend who had this system administrator name on his system on 8th, 9th, 10th grade called, my system administrative name became Zanzibar because of a joke that started in the 6th grade. That became my online name, I guess a gaming name, if you will, although there wasn't really such a thing as gaming back then. And I would go around and I'd see if I could get people to play Sean's games, which was basically Trade Wars. I don't know if you know what that one was. It was a DOS text-based game. It was just text. And you entered commands on a DOS prompt, and then it would tell you what would happen in text. It was a text-based game. And we had about 10 people that liked to play, and I'd collect $4 to $6 a month, depending on how many moves they wanted in Trade Wars. And they could purchase more moves, which would mean more dominance in the game. And so people started calling me Zanzibar in school because it was my system administrator name on Sean's Renegade bulletin board system. Really, it was our Renegade bulletin. I say Sean's because I had nothing to do with it. All I did was collect money from some people. That kind of took on a life of its own. People started calling me Zanzibar. And then I was the drum major of the high school band, and they started announcing me as a joke to make me laugh, because I would never laugh when we were out in the field. That was all business. They wanted to see if they could make me laugh. So they announced me as Zanzibar Vermelio on the field. And then kids who didn't know that people thought that my name was Zanzibar in school. And so kids that didn't know me started calling me Zanzibar. Teachers called me Zanzibar. Like, it just kind of took on a life of its own. My parents and I made it my middle name because I didn't have a middle name, but it was always just a joke. An early mentor of mine had me do the self-actualization workshop, which was like responsibility and self-awareness boot camp rolled into one weekend. And not really understanding what I was doing, I filled out my my thing on that as name you like to be called. I put Zanzibar. Again, kind of as a joke. It was a joke that just kept on going. And they put it on my name tag. And so at that, and then very quickly I did that when I was 17. By the time I was 19 years old, I was leading seminars for that company up in front of 100 people at a time. I had my own tech company by that point.
I did not know this story at all. I did not hear this. I thought this was your name. What's your name?
I know
What's
Z
your first name?
I know Z didn't want to answer this question, but that's the beauty of hosting the podcast.
In my 20s, I made two serious attempts to do away with Zanzibar because it felt contrived. My first name is Jared, like the subway pedophile, so I made two serious attempts to go back to the. I wanted to go back by Jared. I felt like Zanzibar was this contrived name, and especially at the training development company, and especially with my friends that I started the technology company with, who were some mentors of mine when I was younger. We started this tech company. They refused. They said, no. Jared died a long time ago. You're Zanzibar, and that's the way that it is. And it was then that I realized that it was more than just a name. There was a freedom of expression that came with the name change. I got to step into being something that I wasn't. Now, I'm not saying that I couldn't have stepped into being who I am today with the name Jared. Of course I could, but somehow the name had something to do with a transition outward to an outward expression of something rather than just who I am, who I was at Jared. So at that point, I accepted it because both communities that I was participating in at the time were saying, no, we don't accept you. You're Zanzibar now. Just accept it. And so by the time I was 29, I was done thinking that my name needed to be Jared to be true, that my true name really is Zanzibar and also Jared. And my sister still calls me Jared and a few other people, but most people, even my high school friends, still all call me Zanzibar.
That's great. So we talk about alter egos, and like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, and others like dive into their alter ego to kind of like pump them up and like almost an out of body type of experience, like to just get them on stage or get them to perform or whatever. And Zanzibar was your alter ego, and then you fully embodied it. I can't even imagine calling you Jared. You are the Zanzibar, like you run the show, like you are dominant. And so that is an incredible story. I never knew. Did you are you ever thought about legally changing it, or it's just good as a
middle name? We did. Back when I was 18, we added it legally as a middle name. Like I didn't have a middle name. They never gave me one. So Zanzibar became my middle name 30 years ago. So,
I love it.
That's a perfect segue, because the way you tell that story, it brings up a lot of nature versus nurture conversation about, I imagine you having like 17 lemonade stands and like incorporating them at like age 7, but you started leading at such a young age and started diving into entrepreneurship at such a young age. Can you talk about that jump? Owning the technology company early and the early moves you made in your career as a young man? Yeah,
there's a couple of fun things that are a little bit instructional about it that makes some sense to talk about. I felt like when I graduated high school with a 4.3 weighted grade point average. I was in all honors classes, AP classes. I was basically placing out of my first semester of college, and I felt like I had gotten about 6 months worth of education in the 4 years of high school. Not to say that high school was a waste. High school was fun. I was highly involved in the band, and the nerds were my people. And I ran cross country as the captain of the cross country team. Gave that up to play volleyball, and there was a lot of fun things. There was a certain amount of laboratory that high school was that was great. But it never went clunk in my brain that everybody needed to go to college in order to have a life that mattered, but it was just what everybody did. All of my friends basically went to University of Michigan. A couple of them went to MIT. One of them went to Stanford, but almost everybody went to University of Michigan, either the legal, they went down getting their bachelor's degree, then legal, or they went to the engineering school or computer science, or they went into the medical field. And I don't know. It just felt like it was going to be a waste of time, and I couldn't describe it. It was more like a haziness of trying to be intuitively guided by what's next for me. And an early mentor of mine had already moved out to Colorado. I had spent time going to camp in Buena Vista, Colorado, and I knew I wanted to get out of Michigan. I just didn't want to be in Detroit, didn't want to be in Michigan anymore. And so I started telling people that I was moving to Colorado at the end of my senior year. And so that's what I was doing. I didn't think that it was going to go, I didn't plan that it was going to go the way that it all did. I just knew that I wasn't interested in more school, at least yet. And I remember I moved out to Colorado, and initially for like a couple of weeks, I didn't have any money. I moved out to Colorado with no money. I had barely enough to get my car. I was delivering pizzas while I was in high school to get enough money to buy a car, and then I have enough gas to get out there. I had like $1,200 in my pocket total. And so I started mowing lawns when I got there for a couple of weeks, and then I got a job waiting tables at Pizza Hut because I was a delivery driver for Pizza Hut. And I was trying to just find myself when I was there. And some friends of mine who lived there told us that we could stay with them. So we had a free place to stay. So we were staying there. But 6 weeks in, their landlord caught wind of that there were more people staying there and threw us out.
Oh, damn.
And it was getting cold in Colorado. And so now we're staying in my friend's VW camper bus, driving around to Walmarts, trying to find parking lots that won't throw us out. And, cops would wake us up in the middle of the night and make us move on. And we're just trying to camp wherever we can camp. And I'm freezing cold, and I'm waiting tables at Pizza Hut, which sucks. And I remember like 2 months in, I'm like talking to my friends back at the University of Michigan and all the fun that they're having. I'm like, man, I made a mistake. This was a total mistake. I should not have moved out here. My intuition was totally wrong. I should never have done this. This is an awful life, and this isn't working out. And I remember I was my mentor who had moved out to Colorado. One of my friends tagged along with me. His name's Mark Kenny, and he jumped on my bandwagon. He skipped school and he moved out with me. We've been friends since kindergarten, so we were both crying. I remember this was a terrible experience, and maybe terrible to tell in a podcast. But I'm sitting on Arthur's floor, just crying, like this isn't the way it was supposed to turn out. And Arthur's asking me, well, how was it supposed to turn out? And I was like, I don't know, but not like this. And he goes, well, maybe you should start to invent how it's supposed to turn out. And, I'm an 18-year-old kid who just graduated high school, and I'm sort of understanding what he means because I did the self-actualization work, and I'm blah, 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 but I'm still 18. And it was like this moment of, I could either go back home, enroll in second semester of University of Michigan, and do that, which I knew every fiber in my being was telling me that was wrong, but I was already tired of failing. Like it felt like failure. And there was this existential moment for me of, I needed to add something to who I am in order to press through what wanted to use me in moving to Colorado. I needed to press through it. And there was this, I got determined in this moment. I remember very quickly that when Arthur asked me that question, I stopped crying and I started like, oh, if I get to say how it's going to turn out, I must become, I can't even use these words because it wasn't like this at the time. At the time, it just was like focusing, and I felt focused. But now I look back on it, it was like, okay, what's the purpose? What's the vision? I wouldn't have used those words back then, but what's the purpose? What's the vision? What am I going to create? And so the next day I applied for a job I had no business getting at Hughes Aircraft in the Space and Aeronautics Division. It was a temporary job through Aerotech. Somehow I got the job. That's all kind of a funny story how that all worked out. And within the first few months of working there, we were trying to fix computer workstations is what it was. We had a 22-person department. We were supposed to handle 70-ish problems at workstations a day, 70 problems. And by the fourth week that I was there, I was handling 35 of the 70 problems myself. I was really good at handling all of the workstation problems, both because I was a sharp cookie, but also because I was good with people. And a lot of the problems I could solve just by getting on the phone with the person who was at the desk and walking them through something rather than walking around all of Hughes Aircraft's campus, which is now Raytheon. The Hughes Aircraft got bought by Raytheon. They gave me then, after a month of being there, they gave me a whole building and then another building. I was now managing 2 of their buildings, and I was 19 years old. By this point, the training development company had me up in front of 100 people at a time. And I then got out of there and started a technology company with that mentor and a couple other people. We created a company called Dream Team Technologies, and I was the senior project manager and lead salesperson for that company. We took it to about 11.5 million within about 6.5 months.
Wow.
And we were kind of off to the races, but it all came down to this one decision where I'm crying on the floor going, I think I should just go back to college and drink beer with my friends, and decided not to do that and to instead envision something.
You know, what's crazy is most people, that was a pivotal moment in your life, and most people would take the easy approach because they wouldn't have the aptitude to want to create something for themselves. They want to get handed it to them. And having that conversation, opening your eyes up to like, yeah, I can do this. I am going to go create something. I'm just going to change my environment from Pizza Hut to a big boy job and see where this takes me and go all in on it. And then, 2 years later, that happened.
And that's an extreme example. Yeah. That's an extreme example about how you can draw a line in the sand. And yeah, listeners might say, oh, that's a really quick inflection, but that's how it can happen. And is a real-time example.
Yeah, self-determinism is a huge thing. And that's when I discovered real self-determinism. That's when I became something that I value in others. One of the reasons I'm so attracted to the Junto group is a whole group of people who are 100% and absolutely self-determined. That's rare. I could go around my entire neighborhood and find 4 people in the entire neighborhood that might be close. And we have a whole group of people here that are already solved that problem for themselves a long time ago,
Yeah, that's what makes the group special for sure. And that's what makes you an incredible honorary member and being with us the last couple of years. But you talk about aptitude a lot. You talk about purpose and vision. And yeah, you wouldn't have used those words back then. I would never have used those words back then either. But I talk about a lot of that stuff these days. And, purpose is giving yourself meaning and your why. And it gives you that drive and something to your North Star to continue down the path. But when you say like doing something on purpose, aptitude is the ability to do something, right? And you talk about that word a lot. But when you say doing something on purpose, you're not necessarily saying doing it with intention. You're saying, which, you may intentionally doing something purposefully, but you're saying doing it on purpose, like define your ultimate why and your purpose, and then do those things within the realm and in alignment with that purpose. Am I right on that? Am I correct in that? Yeah. And so, challenging yourself on purpose is something that you should always strive for, but not challenging yourself with intention and purposely doing it, but it's find your purpose. So we talk about MTP, massive transformative purpose. Peter Diamandis, it came up with this term.
Never heard it before. That's good. I like it.
You've never heard that? Massive transformative
never
purpose?
Heard that, but I love it.
Yeah. So Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler's Phil's boy, Stephen Kotler, Flow State and Flow Research Collective. Him and Peter wrote a book called Abundance, I think it was. Very in-depth book. Peter comes up with this thing called massive transformative purpose, where don't just come up with your why, that's your purpose, but come up with something that's massive. Like what's the scope? What's bigger than you and bigger than your community? And then what's the transformative piece? What's the who are you going to impact, right? How are you going to change the status quo? So you have a fantastic one sitting right there on Facebook, and it says mission is to ignite the magnificent inner flame of purpose that is within every one of us. Like that's a powerful statement, and that gives you the ability and aptitude to act on purpose. Everything that you do is going to fall in alignment with that mission. And so you just embody that a ton. So talk about purpose now and what that means to you, however many years ago that you wouldn't have used that word.
The easy answer to that is I don't believe in human being a fixed set of properties. I believe that there's ways to impact the world that even can't have words, wherein one cannot speak inside of a human being. The way that we interact with the world around us isn't limited by simply trying to reverse engineer outcomes, even though that's what I get paid to do inside of companies. It could be said very, very easily, I could tell you that what I'm really paid for is to be rigorously connected to what purpose demands. So to be completely disconnected from identity, from self, limitations, circumstances, social mores, and to have purpose solely focus intelligence, wisdom, direction, drive, and action. That's essentially what people are paying me for. So a long time ago, my dad is a serial entrepreneur. He's owned about 9 different companies. He was worth about $10 million at his height, lost it all because he bought a computer company back in the days when you should not be buying computer companies. My dad asked me about this was like 12 years ago. He asked me, how do you do what you do? You've done this stuff with so many companies, and I don't quite understand. And he lives in Grenada now, and he comes into town for a month every summer, and we kind of talk. We have cigars and scotch and just kind of talk about stuff. And I explained to him theory about value proposition, design, execution, scalability architecture, sales planning, leadership, management architectures that I started explaining. He's like, yeah, that all sounds great, but how do you do what you do with companies? You reverse engineer these outcomes. I'm like, well, Dad, it's, you just start with the way you want it to be, and then you find what unquestionably produces it and make it happen. And my dad said, I still don't get that. I'm like, well, it's odd to me you don't understand that. You were an entrepreneur. You own 9 companies. Of course you understand that. And he goes, yeah, I sort of get it. I'm like, well, come to this thing. At the time, I was on the board of directors for the Mile High Business Alliance, which is a local first alliance here in town. And I would do these free events for the members of the Mile High Business Alliance. And I said, I'm doing a free event. I'm going to coach like 6 entrepreneurs in the span of 90 minutes how to 10x their company from a sales planning perspective. Just come and see. It's all reverse engineering. So I spent a good amount of time, 45 minutes of the 90-minute call, working with one lady, nailing down the architecture of how she gets it from point A to point B, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the call, my dad goes, wow, that was really great, especially that you did with that woman. And she now can obviously see how to get from point A to point B. How did you come up with that? I said, well, it's just, she said she wanted to get here. And then by asking the questions I asked, I could see what was already in place. In order to get from here to here, you have to do this. He goes, I know, but how did you know to start with that? He goes, have you done that before with that? I said, well, no, I've never worked somebody with retail clothing before. No, I've never. So no, that was just something we came up with. He goes, well, did you read about how to do that? I'm like, well, no, I haven't read about that. And I said, isn't it obvious? And my dad goes, well, it's obvious now, but it wasn't obvious until you said it, that was what to do. How did you come up with that? And I'm like, oh, I don't know then. I thought that it was just, to that point in my life, I thought that it was logic. It was just rigorous logic that drove purpose resolution. But then in that moment, when I was talking with my dad about it, I realized that there's something ridiculously intuitional about being driven by purpose, like wisdom, intelligence, charisma, everything being governed by what the purpose demands, rather like, is it possible that everything that it means to be alive as a human being is up for grabs? So when you said massive transformative purpose, let's say that let's say that my wife runs downstairs right now and says, Zanzibar, you've got to find a way to fix the Panama Canal in 3 days or your son Oliver's going to die. All of a sudden, I'm the guy that fixes Panama Canals in 3 days. I don't even know what it's going to take. I'm not an engineer and I don't speak Spanish. I've never worked with the State Department of the United States, but I'll tell you this. The Panama Canal will be operational within the next 3 days. Take it to the bank. It's done. Where does that aptitude come from? Right now, that aptitude is completely devoid of my experience of being alive, but I know that aptitude could easily be unlocked if. Where does that come from? Well, it only comes to people who are rigorously on purpose. I'll give you another example. There's a friend of mine named Roger Armstrong. He kind of dinks around on piano. He owns a piano, never taken piano lessons. He likes to play inside the blues scale. He's not a musician, but he kind of dinks around. He's a dinker. And one night we were out with a group of people, and this group of people, we'd had a couple of drinks, not a lot though. We had one drink or two, kind of loosened him up a little bit. And I lean into Roger. I go, Roger, I need you to become the guy that can play anything on the piano for the night. And he opens his eyes. He goes, what? I need you to just be able to play whatever it is. Tonight, you can play anything. He goes, okay.
And he was ready.
All right. He took requests all night long, and he played every single thing. And we karaoke and sang as a group the entire night. That night, he could play anything on piano. Hasn't been able to do it since. It was just that night. He could play anything.
That's wild.
But where did all that aptitude come from? He put the knife to his throat and decided that purpose used the human experience that is Roger. Anybody can tap into that at any point. So when you're talking about purpose, when you're talking about honor, like we did a little bit in the Junto group, ultimately it's a point, being able to point in a direction and say, this is who I am now. I'm not anything that I think of myself as, judgments, opinions, assessments of none of that matters. All there is the purpose directs things. And ultimately, that is the what you said is a massive transformative experience. That's why I like the thing so much. You can get a human being to drastically transform themselves, not by inward looking to try to change something about their ideology, about the world, or have an aha moment, you can transform your experience by giving yourself a purpose that matters.
It's your higher self shining through.
In whatever way is demanded by the purpose.
Exactly.
So, and it even works for negative consciousness, but I don't really like the negative conscious one. But like some people like movies where somebody has to rise to the occasion to seek vengeance for the death of their family, and all of a sudden they become like one of the recent movies, Peppermint, with Jennifer Garner, where she's just a house mom, and over the next 4 years she sculpts herself into the most lethal instrument a human being has ever been, and she takes down an entire criminal organization by herself single-handedly. Yeah, you can see that somehow like being driven by purpose. It's also a negative context, but it's possible to always be governed by positive context too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I would just argue that the negative, we tend to allow that to shine through more often.
Right.
Because because of the inputs that are coming in at us and not being able to have that filter. That's what keeps us at status quo, mediocrity, which you talked a lot about at Summit, which I love the concept of mediocrity moving. What was mediocre for us last year at Summit has totally moved because of the attention and consciousness we put on where we are at and what we're mapping to.
Yeah.
And mediocrity, if you are the concept of having a coach, your leaders of your organization, your family, they don't accept mediocrity once you have made that your new standard. So can you talk about, like, from an organizational level, because it applies to both, but with organizations that you've worked with in the past, how have you brought that awareness to those organizations on what is like their new standard and moving mediocrity and not accepting it?
To get into that in a meaningful way, we have to talk company culture for a second, because the culture will define what is allowable, and the culture will determine how high a growth or how far you can reach, and the culture will also determine what's unacceptable and morally reprehensible and unacceptable by that culture. So the culture of the Junto group, for example, has been upgraded drastically since 4 years ago. Like what it means to be a Junto man, what it means to be in this world in a meaningful way has been drastically upgraded, and people have leaned into and accepted that upgrade and will continue to be upgraded. In an organization, you have to start with where it is. You can't just go for, in my opinion, you can't just go, wow, the best culture I've ever seen is X. This is who we are now, guys. It's better to start with where it is and move it a little bit from where it is in the direction that you want. Company culture, when you look at organizational design, is always a direction and not an end state. So if you're moving toward more accountability, what the culture will be like and what it'll pull for is accountability. Even though it's not yet as accountable as NASA, it's still going to pull for, and the culture will feel like accountability. Likewise, if you've already got high accountability and now we're pulling for a true partnership in leadership or higher level purpose authorization with the executives, or we're playing for an upgrade in leadership, which is very, very much more high-level concepts than just restoring accountability to a group. You don't really want to mess with that until you've got accountability. Like, you've got to take it for what's next in that organization. And as long as you're moving the culture forward organizationally, when you're looking at organizational design, as long as you're moving it forward for what's next, higher next, higher next, higher next, what's next, we're moving it to a higher state than it was before, then the culture of the organization is going to sing at a very high level, and it's going to pull for greatness with people walking into it. That's the kind of a short answer for how you look at organizational.
It's a bamboo banger.
Yeah, we have absolutely evolved in the last 4 years. You came to our very first Junto meeting.
Yeah.
That was the first time I met you. Phil wasn't a part of the group yet. But we have certainly involved. And I think what you're talking about with culture and just the work that we put in this last summit was defining the Junto man, like defining who exactly we are. And we all went around the room and repeated it. And that was super powerful. And just to be able to say, I am loyal. I'm loyal to purpose. I am loyal to one another. I am loyal to family, a leader of industry and community, bound by honor, driven by growth, accountable for our word, and grounded in humility, truly a man worth following. We get to now take that in our personal lives, professional lives, and within the Junto group. And we have so much buy-in in that. Now, it's incredible to go through that exercise. And I think I asked you if you've gone through that exercise with others within organizations and it in terms of like finding alignment with core values and hiring and things like that. Is that something that you've done, or is that specific to us, to our group?
Very rarely. There's three or four. It's not often. There's 1, 2, 3 organizations I can think of off the top of my head. What that is a sacred saying inside of partnership. Like and I said it too. Like I am not willing to screw with my relationship with you guys. Therefore, I must fucking live up to that.
Right.
And there's very few groups where you have a bond and partnership that's sufficient to hold a sacred promise. Mostly if we did that in an organization, it would be like that you even tried for a sacred promise would feel stupid and actually erode from what you said because it would have a connotation of silliness to it because you know that it was not heard the way that it needed to be heard. In that room, it was heard exactly the way that it needed to be heard.
Yeah, it was incredible.
And that means that going back into my life, I'm not going to mess with my relationship with you guys about that. I said, this is who I am. I've got to be that today, and I got to live up to it today. That's an honor and a privilege for me to live up to that today, not a burden. But in most organizations, they're not ready to say something like that to each other. You've got to be careful with that. You can't just go, oh, this is a powerful exercise. Let's do that. Most places, the culture isn't ready for, you know what I'm saying? Like it would cheapen something, not enrich something.
Yeah, and it develops that self-accountability, and it's very difficult to get self-accountability in any organization because everyone is so different and they all act on purpose completely. As you said, the self-determination, it's very difficult to find in a lot of people. But that was just an incredible exercise. That was so fun. And before we did that, you had us get into small groups and we talked about, okay, say who you are. And I almost struggled with that. I'm like, I mean, I'm a guy who has an entrepreneurial spirit, running with a couple of businesses, and I have a passion to, achieve a mindset shift for others for their own success. And any way I can inspire change to do that, that's what I am. But once we put it, that statement of like, I am a Junto man, like now, fuck yeah. Like that's who I am. And I am accountable to this group. I'm accountable to my family and to everyone else out there that I'm working with. So I absolutely, that changed the game for me, even though we've been part of this for for 4 years, but it just gets better and better and better. And that's because of you and what you bring to the table. So I appreciate that. It's good.
Thanks. It was super powerful, but only again, because of the weight of the listening of consciousness that we have in that room made it that way. There was no way that like I said, that I've been involved in hundreds of organizations and groups and departments, and we'd never.
Yeah.
Zanzibar, you put great language to something that we say on this podcast all the time. It's the genesis of this podcast. And to me, I think it is one of the simplest ways that people can improve their life in an instant with the mindset. We say create over consume in a nutshell, but you said you cannot be in a generative place and a consumptive place at the same time.
Yeah,
different spin on it.
Creating versus consuming. I usually say creating versus consuming there. A human being can't exist in both places at the same time. If you get into being generative, then it kills off being a consumptive space. What's in it for me and what do I need? And like pulling things and sapping resources, even energy, consciousness, whatever. When somebody's in a sapping, like I need, and it's about me, and I'm looking for what's in it for me, and I'm a consumptive space in the world, then it kills off being a generative space. I'm not arguing that human beings should be a generative space 100% of the time. I'm not going to put a moral construct on it, like someone should be this or should be that, or this is right or that's wrong. There's no right or wrong here. It's just the way physics works. You can't be both. It behooves people to just probably stretch themselves to be more of a generative space than a consumptive space. When I first started working with that concept about 17, 18 years ago, looking back on it, I would have said at that time that I was a generative space about 70 or 80% of the time. Now I know that to have been false. At the time, I was probably really a generative space about 20 to 28% of the time, somewhere in there, but less than 30. Now, with a much, much broader perspective about what it means to be generative, both from a social setting to a family setting, to a business setting, to just a neighborhood setting, to like, where are you being generative and where are you being consumptive, and understanding that better. Now I'd say that I'm probably more of a generative space 80% of the time. But I think it behooves people, if you mean to bring things into the world and be a source for things, to stretch your own capacity for being creative rather than consumptive.
I think it goes hand in hand, not only for yourself, but for your team. And, talking about training versus developing, right? As a manager, and are we training people to perform tasks? Are we developing them to think on their own and be in that creative space? Training is finite and development is infinite. So, talk about that a little bit and how you manage or talk through leaders and managers, or how they develop their teams.
Oh, it's development. Geez, we would need a series of calls. Developing people is that's the world that I swim in, and I've been doing it since I was 19 years old, and I swear I'm still a novice at it. Now, I'm not a novice in comparison to a lot of people that are in it. I'm a novice in comparison to what I now see as maybe everything that's possible. And developing people is altering the way the world occurs to them to cause there to be an elevated level of performance in life in general, whether that's as a father, as a businessman, as a manager, the world of altering the way the world occurs for people is maybe thousands of levels deep, of paying attention to how it occurs for them now and how to get them what from the perspective that they have, what's the evolution to what will make the biggest difference in their perspective that allows for the biggest how to do that, and the creativity involved in doing that is so vast and enormous. Yes, the developing people is a huge thing. Training people, anybody can train people. There's an architecture I've given away for that. Anybody can be trained to do anything. It's very action-oriented, and it's very easy to train people to do things. But to develop people, what does it take to develop people? I feel like
first of all, they have to have it. And yeah, it's totally scratching the surface. I mean, you could spend, this is your core, or one of your cores, but develop first and foremost, the other person that you're trying to develop has to come in with an open mind. I mean, if they're already closed off, it's almost like they're self-sabotaging their own development, right? I mean, that has to be
sort of, but could you be great enough to lean into somebody for 2 seconds and go, "Are you awake? Look at me and tell me you are." And they're like, "What?" And maybe you can actually cause them to be self-aware enough for a second. There's a shimmer of hope that the door opens to get a shimmer of light in for one moment, that you can cause there to be a breakthrough. And think about it this way for 2 seconds. And after you've thought about that, get back to me, because you're not ready to talk to me. Like, it's even possible at times to break people open for them to be available for a development conversation where they weren't before. So all of the world of developing people, no holds barred. There's no rules. I'm not even saying that that's the answer. I'm saying that there's the whole world is so amorphous and so creative. I've learned that there's anything is possible when it comes to developing people.
I love it. Before we get to the final question, Teddy Lyles told me a little background, something fun that you love to do, Zanzibar, when you were here last week. I hear you're a pretty phenomenal dancer. Is this true?
Yes. There was. My ex-wife and I were the top performing swing dance couple in Colorado for a couple of years.
That is true.
I was a hip hop dancer with the brothers in Detroit back when I was from Detroit. And then when I moved out here, while I was doing I was leading these seminars when I was 19 and 20 years old. I was also being asked to go perform for the Denver Bronco parties and at Wings Over the Rockies for 6,000 people. And it was just hip hop stuff. And my girlfriend turned wife was a gymnast. So hip hop and gymnastics put together, and we'd never taken any lessons or anything. We just let it rip. And the swing dancers hated us. We didn't do anything properly. We didn't do anything the way you're supposed to do it, but it was just like Gap commercial dances, like trick after trick after trick after trick after trick, and people thought it was great. And my wife now is one of the best Latin dancers in the state of Colorado. So she and I do a lot, of course, love to dance, and through the dance community is kind of how we met. And
that's
so yes,
awesome.
we're up, we go dancing a fair amount.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story. I went, just met up with Teddy, good friend of the pod. We had him on the podcast. He's the one that gave us his Spotify playlist, Street Legal Face Melter. So if anyone likes some good music, go check that one out. But this has been an incredible conversation. I mean, I feel like we got to have you on again and again and again over the course of the next 12 to 18 months and just continue the conversation. But we are going to finish it up and wrap it up with one final question that we ask everybody.
All right.
And it could be loaded question in your eyes as well, because I'm sure there's many definitions for it. But this is the SuccessFlow podcast, and we talk about perceptions of success. So what does success mean to Zanzibar?
Well, there's the overarching definition of success, that what I believe it might mean across the board, which is, everybody has to self-define where they're headed and what they want. When I go to work with a company, sometimes I'm only ever willing to reverse engineer outcomes, and people have to tell me what those outcomes are. Sometimes the outcomes that people tell me aren't big enough for me to go to work on them. They'll be like, well, I want to produce this, this, and this. And I'm like, man, if that's all we did, I'd have to shoot myself in the face. We have to have a bigger game than that in order to play together. We've got to
be massive.
Go for that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what the hell? Come on. So sometimes I will demand that people upgrade what they're going after from a success perspective, but I really do feel like everybody needs to kind of craft that for themselves, what they're comfortable with, what they want, what they're spiritually available for. I don't think that you too much want to try to tell somebody they need to be bigger, they need to go for it, they need to this, they need to that. A long time ago, I made a decision, like I was confronting an existential thing. This was before this was after I went to work on creating the technology company. I was going to take my share of what I get made there, and I was thinking about just dumping it into a flower shop and maybe small life, just get to know my neighborhood and make people smile with flowers. Maybe bigger and better, making a bigger difference or impact. Maybe all of that doesn't matter. And maybe success can look like just open a flower shop and give people flowers, make people happy, just be in charge of smiles for a small community. And that's it. I think everybody needs to kind of determine that for themselves. And bigger isn't always better. More isn't always the ticket. Everybody needs to kind of figure out in their heart, soul, and in their own spirit, what does that mean? Now, for me personally, when you're asked what's success for me, I have accepted a higher calling. So my community has asked me for an expanded impact in humanity and in the marketplace. That means the book coming out and having a farther reach. Rather than just whoever I can talk to today, and the divisions that I'm creating architectures for in bigger companies and yada, yada. So for me, success looks like rather than I'm making a difference for tens of thousands of people, that I'm now making a difference for millions of people is what I'm now trying to gauge my success against.
And let's take a second to get the details of this book out. At this time of release, the book is available for order, and you're going to be seeing it from both Steve and myself, and hopefully following Zanzibar. But can we talk through the details that will be linked in the show notes?
So the book is called Managing People from What Matters. It's the tagline for it is the art and science of guaranteeing performance. And it is, there's a little bit of art that's covered in the book, and it's a lot of science that's covered in the book. How do you guarantee the success of anybody that works for you 100% of the time? There should be a banality to managing people. If it's not boring, you're doing it wrong. I'm not saying that you can't also make it exciting with other things, but determining performance should be easy 100% of the time guaranteed. And that's what the book articulates. It's a blueprint for guaranteeing success, and it gives people tangible enough examples and even some spreadsheets to back it up. Like, how do you go after guaranteeing the success of anybody that you manage? This is the first of 7 or 8 books that I want to write. This is one of the easier ones and also one of the more needed ones in the marketplace. I get asked a lot to speak on leadership. Leadership is by far and away a more fun subject for me to work on. I would rather work with people on leadership than management. But what I found is that without a solid management architecture, leadership by its own, meaning inspiring people to greatness and leading people in a profound way, and what that means to stand in front and cause the front of a ship to move in the direction that you want it to is a leading phenomenon. Absent decent management architecture will often fall on its face. You can't guarantee results from leadership, but you can guarantee results from management. So I most of the time will refuse to work with people in leadership until we have a solid management architecture put in place. So, and it's a subject that almost nobody has been trained in. Academia, I've learned, has not very good things to say that direct the performance of other people. And mostly how people become managers is they were good at a job, and so they were made a manager of a group of people to do that job. Except you look at what does it take to manage people to get great success is a completely different skill set from work ethic, determination, and even self-determinism that's required to do a job well. Except, so the qualities that people are promoted on aren't really the qualities that are required to manage. So how do you find somebody that's, and what do you do to train them? And so all of that gets answered in the book. How do you win the game of managing people 100% of the time?
Can't wait to get our hands on it. I'm going to be diving in at first and spreading it with everyone we know. Thank you so much, Z. This will not be the last time on the SuccessFlow podcast, but we're better for knowing you. And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, love you, boys. Thank you.
Thanks.